Today, we are in our virtual event today, we are going to talk about Agile roles, right? And so those roles, we're going to look at who does what, what's the difference between this and that. That is, obviously the title. But, sometimes it gets really confusing within the Agile space. And, some are doing Kanban, some are doing Scrum, some are doing XP, some are doing other things, and some are just making stuff up. And so we want to talk about what some of those roles are. Now, some of these roles are roles that are definitive roles within certain frameworks, such as the Scrum framework. And other roles are roles that have come about, but they're not, they're not really official roles within a framework or methodology or a particular Agile approach. But there are things that you may come across. And so we want to talk about some of those things. The list of roles that we're going to go through is not exhaustive or conclusive, but there are just some of the roles that we know that some folks come across and may be familiar with. So for our panelists today, we have Antoine Maddox, who is a principal within our build line of service. He's a principal in quality specifically at AgileThought. We have Mike Geidler, who is a consultant in our Innovate line of service at AgileThought, and myself, Quincy Jordan. And I am the director within the Innovate line of service at AgileThought as well. So just a little bit about AgileThought before we really dig into today's event. We are spread across the Americas. We are in 6 countries. We were founded in 2000, and we have just over 3,000 consultants, give or take, at this time. And so we take a very, global approach with our business and how we seek our clients and those that we work with. So within AgileThought, we primarily focus in 3 areas. Those areas being transform, build, and run. Where transform is where we have our strategic consulting, Agile coaching, Scrum Masters, transformation consultants, so transformation work, executive coaching, and so forth. Our build areas where we have our digital delivery. So that's where we actually have hands-on keyboards, coding, doing the latest and greatest innovations that are out there. And then our run service, which is digital operations, and ensuring that companies not only stay healthy in terms of the work that's being done, but that the lights, stay on, that kind of thing as well. So we just want to say thank you for joining our AgileThought Virtual Community event today. It is very important to us to note that your time is valuable and you could have spent it in any number of ways. And we're glad that you saw fit to spend it with us today as we talk about these Agile roles. So we're going to dig right into it and get started with Agile roles. So mentoring roles. So I'm going to hand it here to Mike for him to talk to us about the mentoring roles.
So thank you all for finding an hour or so to spend some time with us today. I want to talk to you a little bit about a role that you probably haven't heard of, or you may not have heard of. It's the traveler role. It's actually loosely mentioned in the LESS scaling framework. I know that's not one of the largest frameworks out there, but it's a great framework. Recommend that you go and read about it if you haven't. The beauty of the traveler role and the Agile coach role is that they're really both about enabling and supporting the teams that you have. And again, this is primarily focused at Scrum framework. And they're both, from a traveler or coach perspective, are there to teach team skills. And they both have the goal of working themselves out of a job. And that's a key point. And this is one of the cons that I've seen in organizations that have implemented the traveler role. They implement the traveler role in such a way that they actually are the people that descend on a team and do things, but they don't leave their knowledge behind. And that's a key point here. The traveler's whole goal in life is to leave their knowledge behind. So why might you decide within your organization to use the traveler role? So you would go this route if you have like a scarce skill set. More often than not, when I'm in an organization and they're adopting Scrum and they're talking about cross-functional teams, there's almost always some skill set in the organization that's scarce, right? Where we only have 2 people in the entire organization that do this thing, but we've got 5 Scrum teams. So what do we do? One way to attack it is the traveler role. So those 2 people can descend on a team and maybe do some work initially, but their goal again is to teach and to help people understand how to do it. So then ideally the next time when that product backlog item comes to that team with that scarce skill set, maybe they can do it. Now maybe they can't, but that's okay. At least they're beginning to learn. And that's the whole idea of the traveler. On the Agile coach side, they tend to be more process focused than maybe technical skill set. Again, the traveler is more often than not technical. Doesn't have to be. Maybe your skill set is paperwork. It could be that, right? So they could still do that as well. But generally, the Agile coach is about process focused and specialized skill sets. Any questions?
All right.
You've got one in chat, Mike. Sorry. What's the which role is the one with the domain knowledge, and also the Scrum Master role can be technical? Are the 2 comments to amplify?
So absolutely. So the technical domain knowledge is probably much more on the traveler side. You know, your Agile coach is somebody that may or may not be inside of your organization, right? If you come to AgileThought, we're coming in. Domain knowledge, not so much. Process knowledge through the roof. The traveler is almost always somebody inside of the organization. So they have both business knowledge as well as that technical scarce skill set. Yes, your Scrum Master may be very technical. They can also be very non-technical, right? There's no actual requirement that a Scrum Master be technical. Can it be helpful? Absolutely. But I think we've all worked, hopefully you've all had really great Scrum Masters, and some of them are non-technical and they're still awesome.
All right. So we will move on. And just a reminder, when we take the questions, we'll actually take the questions at the end of each section, not the end of each slide, just so that we can get through everything. Otherwise, we may not get through everything. But please still put your questions in the chat though. All right, so dev lead or developer. You know, these 2 roles sometimes, in particular, the dev lead role becomes a little challenging for folks, in particular those who are in that role, because they're, in particular in an Agile environment, because they're used to giving more direction and really kind of telling people what to do. That's part of the dev team. And then when you have self-organizing teams, well, you know, what does that now look like? Should they still take direction in that way? And so the dev lead really has, they too have a servant leader mindset, but they have a broader understanding of the solution, and they can provide, you know, some mentoring to other developers, but not so much direction, because let's say if it's a Scrum team, then the team is self-organizing and they really don't need someone else from outside the team coming in, you know, telling them how to do things. But they can, you know, very well open themselves to guidance as to maybe how to resolve certain problems, or, you know, things that maybe they don't have the skill set for. Whereas the developer, they're actually responsible for building in quality in the code that the team is actually working on. Now, if the dev lead is part of that same team, then they can give a little bit more direction. However, there's still no hierarchy, you know, in particular, again, if it's a Scrum team. If it's not a Scrum team, then, you know, that may differ. But the developer may also pair with other devs or QA. That's one of the things that we tend to advocate for quite a bit, is pairing with dev and QA. It makes things a lot easier, you know, as you go. They may also participate in mob programming, and, you know, again, collaborate to problem solve. So the things that are common between the dev lead and the developer, they both provide skills to the team. So they're both valuable. They both, bring those things to the team there. And they should both be very proficient in their technical skills. Obviously, the dev lead should be a bit more senior, have a bit deeper knowledge. And they could all be team members, as we said. Now, in some instances, you may have a dev lead who actually resides on a different team, but they may still provide some mentoring to other developers on adjacent teams. And they both have the ability, depending on what the team decides, to participate in the Scrum of Scrums as well. All right, so we'll move to the next slide.
So this is a very common pattern you see a lot in organizations, right? If I've got a Scrum Master, do I need an Agile coach? If I've got an Agile coach, do I need a Scrum Master? And as all good consultants are, we're trained to say it depends, right? Because it does in fact depend. So some of the commonalities you would see in the two is servant leader mindset, right? The Agile coach or the Scrum Master are here to help others get better, right? They're not necessarily here to do things. They're here to help the organization or team grow. A Scrum Master is going to have a much more delivery focus. So they are a actual full-fledged team member on the Scrum team. And so if our requirement is to deliver a production ready deployable increment at the end of every sprint, then a Scrum Master has a role there to play. So very much delivery focused. The Agile coach, maybe not so much. Okay, I've been unmuted. I'm good to go again. So the Agile coach, maybe not so much. Now, will they try, again, from a servant leader mindset, will they try to help the Scrum team or the Scrum teams they're working on to deliver? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, the Agile coach doesn't have as much skin in the game as a Scrum Master might. Like I mentioned earlier, Scrum Master is an actual Scrum team member. That's different. They've got skin in the game. And they also have a role. They actually cause the removal of team impediments. Might an Agile coach help with there? Absolutely. But ultimately, again, it's up to the Scrum team that's accountable and responsible for that. The major difference you tend to see is on the Agile coach side, the breadth of their experience. It's a very common pattern that Scrum Masters start out and they develop more skills and more skills and more skills. And at some point they go, you know what, I'm ready to get out of the delivery focused and I'm ready to go over to the Agile coach. And so once they've made it to that point, it's the breadth of experience that they have that you'll really see the difference. So some of the pros and cons here. A Scrum Master might be, especially if they're very new, very delivery focused, and they forget the servant mindset. They forget hey, I've also got to be helping the team and the organization grow. So that's something that could be problematic. You might also see, and I'm sure you all have run into this into your organizations, that a Scrum Master might attempt to reach out and help the organization grow, but the organization sees them at a lower level for whatever reason, and no, you can't do that. Where Agile coaches don't tend to run into that as frequently. That would be an anti-pattern, by the way. If the organization is pushing the Scrum Master down, no, stay in your team, we're missing a big benefit that a Scrum Master can develop and grow into. Next slide, Quincy.
So, all right, so technical coach or process coach. So when we're thinking about technical coach, we're really thinking about, okay, this person has the ability to really give guidance in literally technical skills, like the actual doing, not just the coaching perspective. But they may take an approach of I do, we do, you do, where they'll do it, they'll do whatever it is technically, then you do it together, and then they stand back and kind of coach and watch you do it to make sure that you're going in a good direction. And But the main thing here is they do have the technical aptitude, more so the technical experience, to really dig into coaching those hands-on types of things. Whereas the process coach, for maybe lack of a better term, they're looking at the system, and they're really focused on the system. How is the system working? Not the system in terms of an operating system or anything like that, but the system in terms of the processes that are needed for people to work together, for things to go from idea to completion, not the technical aspects, but all the other really human things that become involved in the process, as well as to make sure that things have a consistent approach for the teams from a process standpoint. So some of the things that will be common between the technical coach and the process coach might be their Agile experience, theoretical versus practical experience, because some things are, hey, look, that works really well in theory, but in practice, maybe we have to make some tweaks, here and there. And then in some instances, some technical coaches may struggle with thinking beyond what they can just actually do at that time, and thinking in more abstract ways to really kind of start solving some problems that don't currently have solutions to them. And the other thing that's common is doing root cause analysis. Now, those root cause analysis might take different approaches, being one is technical and one is process oriented, but they may still use similar types of techniques like Ishikawa diagrams or 5 whys, just other tools and techniques that are out there. All right, so we took one question earlier. We can try to take one more question if we have any questions for this particular area. Are there any questions? I know you. Can you choose one for me, Dan?
We do have a question, and it's, would you see the technical coach working with the team on software craftsmanship, coaching on things like paired programming, small slices of value? So the quick answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
Right? Absolutely. It can be invaluable to have somebody in here. I'm going to pick on test-driven development, right? I've actually done that. I can show you exactly how to do that in your Java UI or your .NET UI or whatever you're doing. The technical coach can be invaluable there. The process coach might be talking in terms of, well, I can talk theoretically how to do it. But the technical coach almost has hands on the keyboard experience.
Yeah, and I would also add, the process coach might say, hey, these are things that will be helpful for you to do, but to your point, may not be able to actually hands-on show them how to do it, but they have the awareness that, hey, this will help the overall process. Whereas the technical coach, like you said, they can actually go in and hands-on and show. All right, so we're going to keep moving. So now we're going to talk about quality roles.
All right. So before we can understand the difference between the QA tester and the QA analyst, we must first understand the difference between quality assurance and quality control. Sometimes we have a tendency to use them interchangeably depending upon the organization, but there are some distinct differences when reviewed across the quality assurance landscape. And those differences can be found when comparing the quality assurance to quality control. Both are two aspects of quality management. However, the two are defined differently. Typically, QA activities and responsibilities cover virtually all the quality system spectrum in one fashion or another, while quality control is a subset of the actual QA activities. But you can't have QC without QA. So think of quality assurance as a house. It sets up the foundation for what is expected. It is a process-oriented activity that involves evaluation, review, and improvement of processes across the software development lifecycle or methodology of choice. The idea is that if one oversees that process as well as the actual deliverables, it would lead to defect prevention. After all, better process, translates to better product quality. It also involves the initial setup of how things will look, function, and how things will be tested to set up confidence that the requirements will be met. Testing is, in this sense, is not necessarily an actual QA activity, but provides inputs, and therefore it is kind of related. Whereas quality control is more of a product-oriented, activity and directly involves the testing and static techniques such as reviews and inspections that you're so commonly used to seeing. It really is the observation technique and activities used to fulfill those requirements for quality. Quite simply, it is the validation checks and tests performed to ensure the product feature functional requirements are actually met. Next transition. So in essence, quality assurance is a proactive approach to quality, aiming to prevent issues as a whole before they are detected in the product by overseeing the process, as well as the actual deliverables too as well. The focus here is on defect prevention overall. And it really gives us that warranty, like a car warranty, that we are covering all of our bases here. Whereas quality control is more reactive. It's a more reactive approach, focusing primarily on the deliverables or in product at hand. It really is the activity giving us the guarantee that the product is actually matching the actual requirements. Next slide. Sorry, next slide again. So if we split these activities between quality assurance and quality control, you can see that the approach of quality assurance is primarily focused on the process as a whole, proactively getting ahead of the ballgame and overseeing or auditing the process to prevent defects. Whereas quality control are the intangible activities and inputs in order to measure the outputs against the product requirements and detect defects. Next slide. So to sum up, if you had to sum it all up, in terms of definition, focus, orientation, activity type, and aim, quality assurance in testing, when focused on the definition, quality assurance is more the activities designed to ensure that the software corresponds to the spec. Testing is the process of exploring a system in order to find defects. The focus is different too as well. Quality assurance or QA is the quality control and meeting the actual requirements, whereas testing is more or less the system inspection and bug finding. The orientation is different. One is process oriented versus one is product oriented. Then you have, one is largely focused on the activity type of prevention versus correction. And then lastly, the aim, quality assurance is focused on, the whole quality assurance spectrum, whereas testing is focused on controlling the quality. So next slide. So the QA tester, is primarily focused on controlling quality or quality control. He or she conducts prescribed tests on the application to ensure that the quality, design, the integrity, and proper functioning. They apply rigorous testing methods to uncover program bugs before the application is being released. Next slide. Now that is definitely different from the QA analyst, whose responsibility is for applying the principles and practices of software quality assurance throughout the actual development lifecycle. Some of these tasks include being an extra pair of eyes or sensory perception in overseeing the process as a whole and reviewing and improving inputs, to requirements. Being the subject matter expert on the application domain as a whole in terms of client server architecture or the application itself, identifying issues and providing solutions, creating test strategies and plans and test cases, providing test results and tracking all software quality metrics in terms of schedule, effort, defects, participating in review meetings, defect bug prioritization meetings, overseeing the creation of test data, extra pair of hands and gatekeeping deployment releases, providing training to get others up to speed, provide input in making the software better, identifying some development and or testing risk, and documenting and tracking those risks in the matrices. And these are just some of these activities, but right off the bat, we can see how hands-on the QA analyst is actually involved. Next slide. Overall, it is true to say that the QA analyst is involved very early in the process as compared to the QA tester. And the QA analyst is more hands-on in the process of making the product better. However, I would say this, it is everyone's responsibility as part of a team or a development team or Scrum team to ensure total quality management, which is the ultimate goal that leads to better product quality. Now, both QA tester and QA analyst, it involves manual responsibilities in terms of software development, right? Which is strikingly different than that of a quality engineer or software development engineering tester, aka SDET for short. So when it comes to QE or SDET, essentially, they are a developer who builds ways to automatively test the application. The SDET will be required to have strong knowledge or domain knowledge of the application as a whole in terms of architecture, while still functioning in the area of quality control to design and develop frameworks and ultimately an application solution that will essentially end up validating the specific application or product under test. Next slide. So in summary, we here at AgileThought look for those individuals that can focus on or focus in the area or function in the area of quality analysts and or quality engineering. We typically might staff a quality analyst, which is a senior or a lead QA, and pair them with a QA tester or what we call an associate or junior level QA tester, depending upon their experiences and their skill set on a project. Then depending upon the statement of work, we will also staff an SDET or a quality engineer. And the best way to kind of differentiate between the two, meaning QA versus SDET or QA versus QE, quality assurance or quality analyst versus a quality engineer, is where they land in the actual testing model spectrum. Quality analysts will focus, or will primarily function in the very beginning of a testing model, and the quality engineer in the later phases of the quality control model. However, then again, depending upon the application or depending upon the actual project, the quality engineer could also focus, or primarily function in the very beginning too as well. That's it.
All right, so that is actually the last slide for this section. Do we have any questions out there? We'll try to take at least, well, let's take one and then we'll see how much time we have after that.
So we do. We have from Jeff, some agile thoughts are to have a cross-functional team with both developers and testers eventually sharing the work so that any team member can work on a story. Do you see this happening or keeping the lines in place of dev and then QA?
Rephrase it one more time, I'm sorry.
Sure. Some agile thoughts are to have a cross-functional team with both developers and testers eventually sharing the work so that any team member can work on a story. Do you see this happening or keeping the lines in place of dev and then QA?
I see that line being blurred, eventually, or in this case, I see a situation where quality assurance will eventually get to the point where they are very hands-on on defining the requirements and working on a story together. So yes, I do see that forthcoming happening in the future, yes.
Antoine, could you also maybe, I know we've talked before about dev and QA pairing, and we've run experiments with that as well. Maybe some additional insight around that might be helpful as well. Do you want to speak to any of that?
So when it comes to dev and QA pairing, you may be referring to, basically how they go about testing and validating certain functional requirements of a story. In some situations, whenever an actual story or a feature gets delivered, both the developer as well as the quality assurance or the QA person that is on that project will validate that story together. And typically what they'll do is they'll share their actual test cases and work with that specific developer for that specific feature or that area to be able to qualify that particular story. So it kind of works like this: like the developer will release, a developer that is working on a particular piece of functionality, and a QA tester who's working on a particular piece of functionality will be paired together, and across sprints, whenever there is a delivery of that specific feature, that QA tester will share their test cases, that they design to be able to validate the functional requirements of that particular feature or that story. And so they'll work together to validate that it is meeting the actual AC criteria for that particular story.
All right. Thanks, Antoine. Let's maybe try to take one more question.
So from MG, so the QA testers perform software regression testing. Yes.
The QA tester performs software development testing?
Regression testing.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Antoine. We are going to move on into our next section, which will be on product roles. All right. So we will start here with product owner and product manager. Were you going to jump in here, Mike?
Yep, I'm taking this one.
Okay. All right.
So this is a very common pattern you see, especially in larger organizations. The product owner, excuse me, the product owner straight out of Scrum, right? Product value delivery, ordering the backlog, stakeholder accountability, right out of the Scrum guide. So what does the product manager do? One of the things that I tend to see more often in the larger organizations is the product manager has more of an external, outward-looking role. So they might actually be spending time in the field with your customers, your members, or whatever you call those people that are keeping you in business, and really finding out what they need. So out in the field, less time in the office. The product owner is somebody more inside in the organization, day to day, down in the weeds, focusing a ton on delivery. So they can work very in a collaborative way. In fact, that would be one of the cons. If there's a disconnect between these two, you will end up, the product owner and the product manager and product owner need to be on the same level, if you will, from a thought process, so that the needs of your customer gets translated into backlog items that Scrum teams can deliver well. So if there's a disconnect, that can be very problematic for an organization. So from a common point of view, product roadmap, domain expertise, product development, typically speaking, from a business knowledge point of view, maybe your product managers may be a level higher than the product owner, but not necessarily, right? It's just more their focus being internal or external.
And I would just add also that you don't always find that you have both a product manager and a product owner. However, I would say that oftentimes if you have a product manager, there is usually a product owner or someone who has product owner type responsibilities. Whereas if you have a product owner, you don't necessarily always have a product manager.
Great call.
So again, that there's still someone who has to take on some of those responsibilities. And in some instances, depending on the organization, the product owner may come a level up into some of those things. But all right, so thanks, Mike. So business analyst or product owner. All right, so this one to me kind of gets a little interesting, especially in the Scrum space, because when we look at Scrum, there are 3 roles, and guess what? The BA is not one of them. So what does that mean? So the product owner, they have the ownership of the product backlog. They make decisions about the product backlog. They should be value focused, and they have the sole responsibility to prioritize the backlog as well as sequence the backlog. They own that backlog. Now, the business analysts, they contribute to all those things that the product owner does in terms of specifically around the backlog, building out stories, some of those things. One of the things I tend to have to caution folks with is when there is a product owner and there is a business analyst, is for the product owner to not lean so much on the BA that they kind of don't actually have an idea as to what's in their product backlog anymore, because the BA is writing so many stories for them. They're doing, so many things that they begin to be a little bit too hands-off. And then at that point, that's almost more like the relationship between the product manager and the product owner, if that were to exist. In this case, the product owner needs to always be intimately involved with their product backlog, and that business analyst is there helping all along the way with how their stories are created, making sure there's acceptance criteria, all those things. They're not deciding those things, but they are there helping to somewhat check the boxes, on some of those things. Some of the things that are common between the two, and these two can work hand in hand like really well. They both should have domain expertise. They both should have business knowledge. They want to make sure that they're helping to reconcile business needs with the actual delivery of the team. Now, let's say it's a situation where there's a story or something needs to be modified in the backlog. Should the BA just do it? No. Now, the product owner, they can just do it, but the BA shouldn't. The BA could point it out. Hey, I realize that this is the case, and then the product owner has to ultimately make that decision. But the BA is in support, and they can, very well make that recommendation to the product owner in support of those responsibilities that the product owner has. And they're both may participate, as we said, in backlog readiness, as well. All right, so we'll move to the next slide.
Thanks, Quincy. So technical PO versus business PO. So I'm going to be just perfectly upfront here. In my 15, 16 years of doing this, I've seen these two roles implemented, and I cannot tell you an example where I saw them implemented well, or at least how I felt they were implemented well. What you tend to see when organizations do this is they're thinking that my product owner really is top notch on the business side, but they don't have technical expertise, and thus all of the technical things that need to get implemented, they can't speak to. So let's create a new role, and we'll call it the technical product owner. And these two individuals work together to build a product backlog. Why has it not been, at least in my experience, implemented particularly well? What I tend to see more often than not are these two individuals are doing two very different things, and they're trying to bring that together in a product backlog. And you will see things like, well, I can't speak to that. You have to talk to the technical PO, or I can't speak to that. You need to talk to the business PO. When in the Scrum Guide, it's very clear who owns the product backlog. It's an individual. It's not a group of individuals. And that causes some real dysfunction in an organization. How might you implement something like this? Because it is true that the Scrum team needs some technical expertise, and in building the product backlog, excuse me, in building the product backlog, you might need to pair somebody up with the product owner. Absolutely. So, back with the previous slide, we had the analyst. Maybe the analyst can play some of that role and feed in information around, hey, we need to do these technical things to make sure that happens. Oh, by the way, don't forget that every product backlog item must yield business value. So there isn't a thing as in, well, implement, I don't know, TDD, right? You can decide to do TDD, test-driven development, inside of other stories that are adding business value. Big thumbs up, good stuff, right? But the technical things don't stand by themselves, which is why this is more often than not an anti-pattern and something you might want to be aware of.
All right, thanks, Mike. All right, so product owner, or product owner proxy. And I want to reiterate here that the roles that we're talking about, we're not saying these are recommended roles in all cases. What we're saying is these are roles that you may run across in agile environments, and sometimes they cause confusion. So we just want to make sure that people are understanding what some of these roles may mean in different environments. So I say that because a product owner and a product owner proxy, I'm not a big fan really of product owner proxies. I'm a fan of product owners, not so much a fan of product owner proxies. However, there are some environments where I have seen a product owner proxy work okay. But it is a real thing, and it is a role that some organizations do have. And again, we're talking roles, not job titles. So business product owner, they are an expert in business knowledge, whereas the product owner proxy, they have strong business knowledge, but they're not necessarily the expert in that area. The business product owner, they have stakeholder accountability, whereas the product owner, the product owner proxy, they would not necessarily have that stakeholder accountability, because they are in some ways similar to what we describe with the BA and product owner type relationship. So they're not making critical decisions. They're being the product owner proxy. They are taking significant direction and guidance from the business product owner. So they're not making those key decisions. The business product owner, they are responsible for deriving a product roadmap. So you may start seeing some similarities between the product owner and product manager roles, is what we talked about before, because there are some things that are pretty similar in terms of the relationship here as well. So some of the common things are, as we talked about, the domain expertise, the detailed product view, backlog management. I would say the product owner proxy is more the day-to-day backlog management, whereas the business product owner is giving more direction. They're more aware. You could almost say they're more at the epic and feature level versus the proxy may be more at the story level. The product development approaches should be common across the two, because they need to make sure they're very much aligned on the approach that they're taking. Both should be product value, delivery focus, and both should operate in terms of iterative development as well. So that actually ends this section. Do we have any questions out there?
While the questions are coming, I'd like to add, the one place I've seen a proxy PO work is when we were in a distributed environment where half our delivery teams were in India and the other half were all through Americas. So having that proxy PO that can stand in when the other one's asleep was helpful, but it also added some dysfunction. So yes, we do have some questions. In your experience, has a dual product manager, product owner role been successful?
All right, well, you just answered that one. There was one.
Well, this was product manager and product owner.
Oh, well, yeah. Okay.
Yes, so.
Yeah, that's right. So still the answer is yes. I actually think that, I don't think the original intent within Scrum really needed a product manager. But I do think that because so many organizations just made the assumption that they could make all of their BAs product owners, that it really hurt the level of authority that was needed for what the original intent of a product owner was. Because the original intent of a product owner, really you wouldn't need a product manager. But in many organizations, because they have that product manager role, and you have, someone who had that deep domain knowledge, but they just weren't going to spend that amount of time with the team because they needed to be out in the market, out seeing what is the latest and the greatest and all those things, happening, that, and the amount of research that they have to do. So it is a relationship that in an agile environment most definitely can work. I've seen it work, but again, I don't think the original intent was that you needed a product manager. Do you have to have a project manager? No, but someone still does have to take on those responsibilities and in that role who can do those market facing things. And it's very difficult for one person sometimes to do that, depending on the type of product that they're developing. All right. So I think we'll need to move on because we're close on the time. I did want to comment on one thing that I saw in the chat about the BA role not being an agile role. So the BA role is not a Scrum role per se, but it very well can be an agile role. So we do need to make sure that we're not automatically lumping agile and Scrum together because they're not lumped together. So you could have, XP or DSN or like any number of agile approaches that may involve some roles that Scrum does not.
Great call out. I missed that one.
All right, no worries. All right, so supporting roles.
So this is a really common pattern you see when you walk into organizations. So we've made all of our project managers Scrum Masters, and it's all going to be great. And so generally speaking, my experience, that's an anti-pattern. But some project managers make awesome Scrum Masters. Look at what I did there. Absolutely, right? It's about mindset. If I am the type of individual that wants to help my team and my organization grow, right? I can come from the project manager hat and put my Scrum Master hat on, and I'm going to be just fine, right? If I am a servant leader, that's going to work really well. If I am the type of individual that is delivery focused and that's all I care about, meeting the dates, I'm going to struggle as a Scrum Master because I'm not focusing on helping the team grow, helping the team learn how to self-manage, helping the team learn how to deliver. So that's a really key point here around if I'm going to transform my project managers into Scrum Masters. Is there a role for project managers? In my experience, the answer is yes, especially at scale. Scrum Master can have more than a team. I would suggest to you that if a Scrum Master has more than one team, those teams had better be really mature and executing at a high level. If you have 3 brand new teams and you're hoping a single Scrum Master is going to be able to help there, you're in trouble. So in the model where you have many Scrum teams functioning, a project manager can sit above the individual Scrum Masters and have a broader view. That I like to talk in terms of the forest versus the tree view. So a project manager can help the Scrum Masters maybe organize and align and help the Scrum teams work on delivery, while the Scrum Masters can focus on how do I help the teams grow? How do I help them develop skill sets? So that's where I see these two roles play together beautifully. I think that's the only slide in this section.
It is.
So questions?
Yep.
So if we want, we don't have any questions for supporting roles, but we do have 1 or 2 from the previous section.
All right, have at it.
All right, so let's see. In my experience, the Scrum Master and product owner should be interchangeable. So my 2 cents is they might be, but they play 2 very different roles in the Scrum framework. And if you make them interchangeable, and in fact, I think I have seen once or twice where the Scrum Master was the PO, they will rob Peter to pay Paul, because they are two very different things in what they're supposed to be focused on. And it's really hard to make those two things the same.
Yeah, and I would add that I think it's a recipe for disaster. There's maybe a very small window where it may seem to work. And if it's a very, very short engagement, and when I say short, I mean weeks, then sure, you may be able to pull it off. But and that's saying, like if it's a 6-week engagement, you're doing 1-week sprints, something like that. However, it's most definitely, an anti-pattern, and it is riddled with problems if you do that. You're putting judge and jury all together. It's just not a good recipe for success. So I would pretty much never recommend that the product owner and the Scrum Master be interchangeable, in that way, and definitely not coexist in one teammate, at the time. Now, you could have someone who is the product owner for one product and the Scrum Master of a totally different team. That you can do. But if they're on the same team, same product, and so forth, it's typically a very, very bad combination. All right, so we will move to the next section, Oversight Roles. All right, so the manager or Scrum Master. All right, so this tends to come up from time to time because the managers, you have an agile environment, and then they start feeling a sense of like I don't have the same control or input or what have you that I had before. So the manager should focus on HR related tasks, performance reviews, career guidance, all those kinds of things, even mentoring, individuals. But that mentoring really has more to do with their career and not to do with the team that they reside on in the product that they are developing. Whereas the Scrum Master, they are hoping to coach the entire team. So they're helping to, even if you say mentor, they're kind of helping to mentor the entire team. They are looking after the well-being of the whole team. Now, they're both looking after the well-being of the individual, which should be important, but from different perspectives. The manager is looking at it from the perspective of this person's career, them being an employee, their positioning at the company, those types of things, whereas the Scrum Master is looking at kind of the same things, but as it pertains to the Scrum team, not as it pertains to the company at large. In both can benefit from having a servant leader mindset. Does a manager have a servant leader mindset? Not prescribed, not really, but they can benefit from it. Whereas the Scrum Master, they are prescribed to have that servant leadership mindset. All right, next is manager or product owner. So very, very similar to the last. The reason I bring this up is because I have seen before where, especially early on in the Agile journey, where some product owners felt the need to look after the team in a way almost like they're managing the team, and they don't have to take that responsibility on. The Scrum Master, they're there to help protect the team. That product owner really, really needs to focus on making sure that the product backlog is in such good health that the team can be successful by pulling from that backlog, as time goes. And so that is largely where that focus needs to be. So I know we're really, really close on the time. I'm going to move on and just have this up while we take a question or two.
So far, we haven't had any questions on that section.
All right. There was a question I thought I saw. Let me see. Oh, I want to go back to this question. What is the survival rate of product managers in agile transformation, which I thought was hilarious for it to be phrased that way. I think the survival rate is very, very high. Again, in an agile environment specifically. Now, if it is only Scrum, then that organization has to decide, are they going to utilize product managers and product owners, or are they only going to have product owners? But in an agile transformation in general, if product managers exist in that organization, you still have products that have to come to market. And as long as you still have products that have to come to market, you have to have someone who has that vision and that experience, that domain experience, to be able to help that product come to market. And therein lies, you will still need that product manager. All right, so we're right at the time. All right, so our next event will be on creative ways to make Scrum fun. That will be July 22nd from 12:30 to 1:30. So we pushed it back 30 minutes. We're really kind of experimenting to see if that time works a little bit better, because we know we're oftentimes overlapping people's lunch. So we'll see how that goes. Thanks everyone for joining. And if you want to connect with us on LinkedIn, you can actually go onto the LinkedIn app and literally put your phone up to your screen, and it will read the QR code that's up there, and you can then connect with us if you choose to. Antoine is also out there on LinkedIn under Antoine Maddox on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to any of us if you choose to. Thank you so much for coming, and we hope that you got a lot out of this today.